Hello and welcome back to the newest edition of the Noble Fury podcast. Today's topic is free speech, a very ambitious topic. Jeff, there's a lot of places.
Super important topic.
What comes to mind for you?
Well, the thing about free speech is that it's always been important, always since the inception of our country, but way before that. This is precisely the mechanism, the route by which a totalitarian state, a dictator, a tyrant controls the population. That's why the founders of the U.S. Constitution were so emphatic about providing individual right to free speech. The First Amendment is that guarantee, but several of those rights, those individual rights, are borne out in the 10 or the first 8 of the amendments. But the free speech was first, and was first for a reason, and that's because a tyrant tries to squelch, shut down dissenting voices.
Sure.
And so
there's power in that, right? There's obviously
when you control the narrative, you control the population. And so the founders wisely embedded a individual right to free speech, and fortunately, over time, our Supreme Court became, very much protectors of that right. And so it is probably the single right which has the greatest protections among all the rights that are guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution.
And I think one of the first extensions of free speech in general is freedom of the press, obviously, right? So when you memorialize something in print and it's there for people to read, evaluate, contextualize, and react to, and I think an extension of that, obviously, is social media. Is sort of now become a form of the press. I guess it is the press, really.
It is, and it is right now undergoing scrutiny in the legal world. There have been several states, Florida and Texas, that have imposed duties on Facebook, Twitter, X, I guess, and YouTube. To ensure that it is not shutting off voices without providing the reason, an individualized reason why those voices should be shut off. That was pursued legally, that challenged legally, and winded up before the Supreme Court, which heard the case in February of 2024 and made a decision about it this summer. And what they decided was that those lower courts, the appellate courts, dealt with the Texas and Florida cases, did not properly use the tools of analysis for First Amendment rights doctrine.
What a surprise.
And so it sent it back with instructions on how to evaluate those laws and how they would work in the context of these social media platforms. So there's going to be more to come in the very near future, I think, about those laws. Now, the state is not supposed to impose its demands, its will on speakers. So if you are in a public forum, if you are in a public building, if you are in a public school, you have certain rights to speak that you don't have, to express ideas that you don't have in a private.
So you're getting into this really intense area about schools.
We're not going to go too deep, but it's important to understand, though, that when you're standing on the street corner or the courthouse or before City Hall, you have a much greater level of protections to say what you want to say than you do if you're in a private business. If you are in a bookstore, that's a private business. You can't just go on a tirade and say what you want to say. The owners have control, managers have control, owners have control over the conduct and speech that goes on there, even though it is a business and it's held to certain conditions about selling openly to people and not discriminating against people who are buying, but not their speech. Same is true. You go to work during the day, you go to your office, and you're not free to say whatever you want in the office.
But not guaranteed the rights of free speech under
You're
the
not
auspices.
guaranteed
Yeah.
rights because it's a private organization. Now, this is why this is a problem for venues like YouTube or Facebook or X, because they're really private, places, but they do have some of the characteristics of a public forum, and so they kind of have a blended disposition, which the courts are going to figure out. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, the important bit is that when we're talking right now and we're posting this video, we have to, abide by certain terms of use, and that's fair. We don't want
Sure.
above all, we want to have a civil dialogue.
Of course.
We want to have discussion. And so if everybody abided by that level of civility that we all commonly agree, but the problem is that some people have a different understanding of what civil discourse is.
Which really brings us back to sort of social media, which sort of at the moment seems to be kind of the, sort of the barometer on free speech. It sort of seems to come back in many instances. Oh, did you see what so-and-so posted? I think some of the hypocrisy in social media, to me, is really, really stunning. And it's, if you think about before Musk bought X, there was sort of it was all one-sided. Social media was really all from one direction. And as soon as he bought X, that one direction was completely up in arms and thought this is a miscarriage of, I can't believe this, and what he's fooling the country. Right. All of a sudden, X was, I'm quitting my X account because he has dissenting opinions. Obviously, foundationally, social media should be all platforms for, all opinions. It's an open forum. That's the protections they're supposedly granted by the FCC. And of course, it's all very one-sided. It's all opinions until you disagree with their opinion. Then all of a sudden, you're banned.
And so that is a problem even in public schools. So there's a very famous case. A lot of First Amendment law, Supreme Court doctrine comes out of the late 1960s, early 1970s. When the Vietnam War was going on. And so there was a lot of protesting, a lot of disagreement. And so students would, for instance, there's a very famous case, I think it's 68 or 69, called Tinker. And these middle school and high school students wore a black armband to protest the Vietnam War. All these protests were kind of counter to the government's position that it wanted the people to be, following along with the war, that was its duty to follow along with the United States position on that war. World War II had tremendous popular support among the public. World War I had a mixed disposition, and there was a lot of hostility to sending U.S. troops abroad to Europe to fight a European war. Vietnam War had a similar, maybe even more protesting, and so
you wonder if that's directly the age of the World War I, right?
Could be.
Sorry.
There's probably a lot of social dynamic going on there. But the interesting thing is that you can imagine a government that does not want to have a disagreement by the population. So what is it going to do? It's going to shut down protests. It's going to make sure that people don't express themselves that way because it counters the narrative. But that's precisely what our founders wanted the people to be able to do.
Of course.
You want to speak the truth, your truth, and you want to have an environment where you can do that without being rounded up and thrown in jail. But the government, right, does not like that because it means that they're under pressure to change its positions. And so this case, Tinker, involved a middle school and a high school. And these students wore the black armbands. And the court said that, you know what? The school cannot squelch that speech because it was a symbolic form of speech. They weren't literally speaking. They weren't expressing anything with
Vitriol or
screaming,
Right.
chanting. They didn't have big signboards that they're running in everybody's faces. These were just very demure black armbands, but it got the message across sufficiently that
in some respects effectively because of
very
right?
effectively.
Yeah.
It may have been more effective, and so the school, I believe it expelled all these kids. They sued, and following the suit, there were appeals and so forth, and the kids ended up winning.
And there's a modern day version of that.
Massachusetts. And a boy, he was in middle school, I believe 7th grade, wore a shirt that said, there are only two genders.
Right.
And that's all. The shirt was a very plain shirt. There are only two genders. And he was sent home. So a few days later, he comes back to school with a different shirt. And this time it says, instead of saying are only two, it has that blacked out with a censor across it. So there are genders, I think is what it ends up saying. Again, sent home. And the school made the case that, this is providing to certain students, this is providing hostility that they can't escape, and it disrupts the flow of the academic day, and we are in a position to want to have a smooth running.
The kid won, I think, didn't he?
No. This is caught up in several layers of lawsuits.
They suspended him, didn't they? Because he kept wearing the shirts.
They did. I think they suspended him, but he was allowed to return to school. He lost, I think, in the lower court, and then he appealed, lost there, and he's being represented by a group, that kind of public interest law firm.
Sure.
And they've now, I think just literally within the past month, within the past 3 weeks, they filed a claim or a suit, not file a suit. They've taken their loss at the appellate level to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court will hear the basic merits of the case and decide if they're going to actually hear.
And because it's a free speech case, there's a good chance they'll
I think they will, actually.
Yeah,
I think they're going to pick it up.
I don't know. I'm not sure what the
And
merits.
actually, based on Tinker, I'm not quite sure how it's going to fall out, but I think they've got a fairly good shot of winning the case at the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court grants certiorari, because it seems to follow in this kind of Tinker-esque doctrine that was created in 68, 69. And so the school, the problem they have is they were themselves lining the hallways with posters and banners about certain LGBTQB plus rights. And they were kind of promoting a certain philosophy. Now, I'm not going into the issues here because it doesn't matter. Really, what's at issue
what matters is they did.
Does speech get shut down or not? And so, I think I can speak for you, but please, add to it as you need. But at the university, at the academic level, at a high school or a middle school, even. The principal purpose should be, for the discovery, deliberation, and debate
discussion,
about
open
truth,
discussion. Sure.
Right? You discover truth, you deliberate it, you think clearly and deeply about it, then you debate it. That's how we grow as a society. That's how better ideas become the ideas that shape the way we do things.
This is why the social media situation is so interesting, because prior to Musk buying X, it was all one-sided. As soon as Musk bought X, there was all this outcry that there's this bias, supposedly, and it's like, wait a second, social media has been biased since it started. Now there's something it's counter to your position. That makes it biased, just because it's not right. It's not falling in line with your position, and we should shut it down.
Yeah.
Which is, again, the irony that social media originally was hiding under the auspices of open forum, public forum, open discussion. Never been, really. And the proof is, it's well documented that Facebook was censoring, dissenting opinions, right? And
by dissenting opinions, I think you mean opinions that let's just say the majority agreed with of Facebook employees, right? It was really about
The speech police.
The speech police at Facebook. The majority of their opinions determined what the level of censorship would, or how censorship would be enacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and the degree to which it would be enacted.
And interesting how insidious that is because of Facebook's reach at that point, right? In other words, Facebook could easily sway public opinion just based on the depth and level of their reach. Their position is in fact an ability to sway public opinion just by virtue of hundreds of millions of users, right? Billions, I think, are on Facebook or were. So that alone is reason to cause, wait a minute, we really need to stay true here. We really need to stay true to the idea, the concept of free speech, because of our lofty position, right, as an organization. But instead, they leveraged it and weaponized it and did all the things that you would hope they wouldn't do.
Yeah,
do no harm.
It's incumbent upon all of us, really, to protect our own voices. That is, it does not matter. Truth is not a popularity contest. If everybody said the sky is orange, it doesn't matter. You don't see it as orange. You need to say this. No, the sky's not orange. Popularity and truth are different things. We should not commingle the idea that truth is a popularity contest.
Well, and visually of your point, if on Facebook or in certain realms of social media, if there was enough people on social media that said the sky was orange and you said the sky was blue, you were
banned.
Yeah.
You were censored. You were censored.
Not because the sky wasn't blue or was blue. It was because you disagreed.
I want you to see how hostile this sort of censorship can become. And the problem with social media is we've not quite figured out what can be done legally and what can't be done legally within the confines of the social media forum. But and we'll know this, I think, sooner than later. I think the problem with social media is that it takes on a disposition that's both as a publisher, like a newspaper, and like
news source,
and like a common carrier. And a common carrier is your internet connection, is your cellular connection, is your phone connection if you have a landline phone. The common carrier provides the bandwidth, and you can then, whatever the content of that bandwidth
it's a fire hose.
entails, it's a fire hose, and it's your content's the water in the fire hose. So the split disposition on what social media is doing, because it kind of is acting like a publisher in that it's curating. So a newspaper curates the stories. They authorize the writing of the stories. They select which stories, the shape of them, the nature of them, and so forth. Well, the social media platforms are kind of doing that too, in some more to a greater extent than others, but. They have this sort of safe harbor provision that allows them to act kind of in this quasi capacity, but not get sued as being
they have their cake and eat it too.
They're having their cake and eating it too.
Legally, they're protected, yet it's a free for all. It's really
that's right.
The worst. There's no regulation, virtually no regulation. It's like you say, quasi-regulation, but they can hide under the auspices of that. And that changes the whole slander, right? That changes the definition.
Well, slander is a whole another subject. We wouldn't want to get into that. So defamation, I think you're going with slander. No, that's a very serious business. So if you are a public figure, it's very difficult to make the case that you've been slandered. So if you
just
are,
based on virtue of being a public figure,
because
that's
you're a public figure, and people
can
say
shots
things, right? They can take shots at you, and that's the trade-off for being a public figure. You benefit from being a public figure, and that's going to be one of the costs.
Here's a question: if you're a restaurant, you're a local pancake house, and somebody posts that your pancakes were terrible, are you a public figure? Can you? Because somebody's been sued for leaving terrible reviews.
That's a good point.
It's a really gray area.
That could be a gray area. If it's borne out in truth, then truth is the sunshine that ends up as acting as a disinfectant. But that said, people have had to go through a great deal of grief to win those defamation cases, and it just depends on the nature and the facts. But we don't even want to go into that world right now. Right. I want to bring up a case that was recently brought to light. University of Tennessee has a health services college in Memphis. And there was a graduate student who was studying pharmacy. I think she may still be studying pharmacy there. And she had posted on social media platforms. I'm not even sure what, Instagram perhaps, maybe Twitter at the time, Twitter, X now. And she had made some kind of, racy comments about some music and about some discussions. These are relatively private conversations, though. These are not, has nothing to do with the school, with the graduate program she's in. She makes no reference to them. These are conversations that, while others can see them, they're really about private activities.
Super important distinction, obviously, for where you're going. I understand. Yes.
And so the university somehow gets wind of these things, and they try to expel her. They try to end her academic career because of them. She sues.
Now, but the comments were the comments. You think they were?
They were racy comments. I didn't actually see the comments. I've seen how they were described. They had sexual content, and that's why I'm calling them racy.
Not to do with race in a traditional sense.
No.
Gotcha.
Nothing to do with discrimination. In fact, the woman is an African American pharmacy student,
but the comments were off color and sort of. Obviously not
of sexual nature.
Okay.
Some of them were,
Okay.
and so the school decided that it really wasn't, the kind of comments that a graduate student at their university they would expect to have.
Unbecoming of a
graduate student.
Yeah.
So she gets in trouble with the school, but then she sues. I'm so happy she did, because she went through the
it's free speech is where you're going,
and the free speech evangelists. The organization's called FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and they backed her, and they provided legal counsel, and they won the case.
They should have.
Their initial letter did enough to remove all the negative stuff in her record, and they had voted on whether or not they were going to keep her, and they wanted to expel her, and they changed their position after that letter. But then they decided to still sue, and they did, and so they won the case.
Here's the problem with that whole thing is that to some degree the damage is done. Her reputation, that's going on over weeks and months, maybe years, certainly weeks and months. And during that time, there's all this
terrible.
There's all this churn of there's characterizations and mischaracterizations and summations that from one side and one perspective and people's opinions about what she was and what she is, and there's no getting any of that back. Toothpaste doesn't go back in the tube.
No.
It's a classic example is that kid. I can't think of his name with the Indian. So
the Covington kid, he's known as the Covington kid, from Covington, Kentucky, just outside of Cincinnati.
The way the press characterized that kid, in essence, certainly over the short term, 5-year, 10-year, destroyed his life, turned him up.
They tried to.
Yeah, they certainly did. And it's just like the kid that was at the football game and they had the black face. I don't know if you saw there was a football kid. So it was a 9-year-old kid.
Oh, yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs game, and he had his face half red and half black, and they intentionally showed just the black and said the kid had blackface.
Right.
Crazy.
Well, they intentionally took footage and altered it so that you'd only see the narrative that they wanted to have, right? And so, but that's the kind of idea with the government, right, wanting to maintain a narrative, and if your speech is contrary to that narrative, then they want to shut you down, and that's what the First Amendment
let me
protects.
ask you this, and it's I guess it's a rhetorical question. What were their motivations? What did somebody think that process through to the point of thinking, well, clearly I'm going to get away with this. No one's going to find. I mean, the behavior is so absurd. It's as if standing in front of a police officer and stuffing your pockets full of the money in the bank and then being surprised that you are in jail for stealing money from a bank.
Right.
I mean, the setup is so preposterous.
But your point, you just got the right analogy a moment ago. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's out of the tube.
But you can't imagine. Can you imagine the guy sitting there going, "Look at this! I've got this story, and here's this kid," and you're just like, it's clearly. I mean, there was pictures in other places of the same kid with both sides of it. I mean,
nothing controversial, really.
But does this show? I hate to say it, but it does show the level of depravity,
mendacity,
right? I mean, what are they thinking? And then to try to weaponize the media, the justice system. Look what, I'm sorry to say, the current administration has done. I'm not sorry to say. Look what the current administration has done against free speech to weaponize it. Firing people that spoke out against any issue, right? Pick your issue that the COVID.
The COVID, that's a great segue, I think.
Yeah. The COVID thing is mind-boggling because people lost their businesses, they lost their careers, military people, medical people.
And these aren't just like literally infantry soldiers. We're talking about physicians who have been in academic practice for years, either at the... So there's a very famous medical doctor / economist. He holds both an MD and a PhD in economics, and he's at Stanford. And he was questioning the sort of one-size-fits-all approach to COVID early on, and he got shut down.
With good reason, by the way. That's a common sense approach. Wait, that's not even a medical approach. Why would you think, I'm so sorry, you're right in the middle of a sentence, but why would you think a 10-year-old getting COVID would be the same as an 80-year-old getting COVID? I'm not a doctor, not even close. And I could tell you common sense at some point we kick in and go, well, maybe a 20-year-old, whatever. Somebody whose central nervous system, I mean, come on. The whole thing just didn't even make sense.
And his position was not an extreme position. In fact, it was a very thoughtful position.
Common sense.
Common sense, that's
common
fine.
Medical sense,
It was also just a thoughtful position that, hey, I think we're going to extremes about this. Let's reevaluate. And so he did several analyses. I think he's published papers since the inception of COVID. He's written a great deal about it. And most people now say, he's actually right. But his voice was shut down both by the university and by the medical apparatus, the medical administrative state components, CDC, health and what was it called? Health
and National Institute of Health, NIH.
NIH.
Thank you. We've just got less than a minute left, Jeff. But I was just going to say, and I am sure, I don't know if he had a position on social media. If he did, it was shut down. If he didn't, it's only because he wasn't shut down just because he wasn't on it. Because social media they went after anybody and everybody that went against Big Pharma, legacy media, the Biden administration, teachers union. These are the players in the whole COVID game.
Yeah.
And of course, Big Pharma. We should have another conversation. In the last
that's an entirely different conversation.
Big Pharma got
the COVID response.
Big Pharma got their liability waived. If there's any,
well, it was an experimental drug,
but it was intentionally deemed experimental so that they would have no liability.
Right. That's correct.
Yeah, and that was the only reason, not because it was experimental.
What I find interesting is
we just got 30 seconds, 20 seconds.
Rachel Maddow famously told the American public on her show, the 94 people who were listening to her, she famously told those 94 people that the COVID shot, the vaccine, was going to prevent the spread of the virus. That
never was a vaccination.
Once you got the vaccination, you can't be spread. And nothing could be farther from the truth.
It was never a vaccination. And they kept using that term intentionally.
But so the point there, though, is some speech, right, was not canceled, even though it was wrong, completely wrong.
It perpetuated their message, so they let it go.
It pushed the narrative.
Sure.
It allowed the narrative to continue. Whereas the speech that was contrary to this narrative was canceled. I would trust this physician / economist, his ideas. I don't trust anybody's ideas without my own vetting, but I would trust his ideas
without an axe to bear. He didn't have an axe to bear.
Rather than Rachel Maddow.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it there. Fascinating topic. It feels like we asked more questions than we answered.
And we did. We actually just got going on this.
It's really a lot to unpack
Yeah.
With free speech. But things are better than they were. There's no question about that. And to that point, we can say whatever we want. We don't have to worry as much about.
Well, we always want to speak the truth, though, right?
Of course,
we don't want to. We don't want to say things that are.
I teach my kids that. I said, listen, if somebody accuses you of something you didn't do it, you have nothing to hide. You have anything to worry about. You have the truth on your side.
Yeah, and that's why the doctrine that controls sort of free speech, say in schools, there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off between the conducting the affairs of school and keeping it under control.
The school thing is a whole podcast.
The school thing is
a whole podcast. Yeah.
A student's right to express their ideas, and so there's a tension there, and that's true outside of school as well. I mean, most of the doctrine covering the basic public policies would be individual rights to express themselves versus the public, the well-running public without fear of harm, right? So if there's a physical harm.
Yeah.
Versus having, sort of just being tough-skinned and listening to somebody say something that you disagree with. And ultimately, I think that's the message I'd like to maybe leave with is we all need to have thicker skin and not be so sensitive to people who have ideas or thoughts that we disagree with. In fact,
common sense.
If somebody is saying something that you vigorously disagree with, but they're allowed to say that, that's free speech. When somebody says something that you want them to shut up about and not say it anymore, that's totalitarianism.
Yeah.
You want to have free speech, not censorship.
Yeah, big difference.
Big
difference. We'll have to leave it there. Great discussion.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.